Okay, welcome back to part 3 of this lecture, Concept and Process for Designers. And when we were last talking, we were talking about Frank Gehry. We had looked at this building, and then I was talking about how there's a wonderful documentary about him and about his design process where he's just with his team of designers, like his lead designers, and they're just basically in the middle of the studio. All they're doing is just looking at different kind of very loose sculptures they made out of crumpled paper, and not like expensive paper or anything. And they're none of them are plans or designs for a particular building. They're just different structures, different shapes, and they're just seeing what they like. And then once they make one, he might do drawings based on those. But then the next thing they do is when they're really happy with one, they take it to the engineers and the AutoCAD artists, and they come up with renderings of what that would look like as a structure. And only then do they start thinking about how would this actually be a building, and which building would it be a good, for which client, which type of. This is Disney Hall, by the way, in Los Angeles. And how what would be the right space for this, and only then do they start thinking, okay, how would this thing stand, how could we just build this and make sure it actually doesn't fall over. Now when in the process and in the concept lecture, I spent a good deal of time talking about different types of conceptual art, including and the history of conceptual art, and I talked about systems art, and how there are artists who create kind of systems of making artwork, people like Saul LeWitt. And as I was doing research for this lecture, and I started thinking about how things like designing a typeface is in some ways very similar to what a concept or a process or systems artist might do, which is that they're making a thing that then is a system of actions that someone else can use, right? That when you make a typeface, if you were a typeface designer, right, let's say you were lucky enough to be the one who designed Cooper Black, right? You're not just designing a letter or a groups of letters. You're designing a system of how all these letters interact, all the different marks. It's it's a family, right? But it's also the way they all interrelate. So a type system like Helvetic here, right? You can see it in all the different versions of it. And there used to be, a joke there that was more funny but less tasteful. So branding systems, the same sort of thing. And let's start off with the way students tend to think of branding systems, which is that they often think of it in this kind of way, essentially taking a business system and then just kind of expanding it to other stuff. But what branding systems really are is a complex thing that a group of designers, after a lot of research, they create these packages, which are tons and tons of text, and they're just like a list of rules, right, of how to use this system that this company has designed, how to use it, how to use the branding system and be consistent. And so it's like, all the way down to like, where should you place the logo mark, where on this kind of document, where should it be, that kind of thing. And it gets very, very complicated. But what's interesting to me is that in a way, it's like, it's very similar in some ways to systems art, because the designer is actually not so much designing the finished product, they're designing the set of rules by which other people will implement it, right? There will be all kinds of things made based on this branding system. The branding system will kind of will define what the boundaries are, what the rules are, but then the creative work will happen within those rules. Here's some other examples, right? The Android branding and business system, and I was just talking about Michael Beirut with a student. His packaging design for Mohawk paper. And here's some other examples of artists or designers kind of like trying to rethink. The reason why I'm picking this Man versus Machine, this campaign, what I like about the work I've seen from their website and the stuff I've seen from them is that they have this kind of this approach that's a lot like almost like they're looking at graphic design from the point of view of installation artists. They tend to think about how they can create different kind of installations or different kinds of structures, and they have a very kind of conceptual approach to what they do. So like they made this campaign, More 4, which was for Channel 4, which is a TV station in England. And it led to them using this idea of these kind of color flip books, these color sample books that, you know, have these hard plastic sheets of different colors, kind of like a Pantone flip book, and using them to create this logo, the More 4, or the More 4 logo, but then using them in these various kinds of installations, like here, or like here. I think this one is on a beach in Iceland, of all places, or maybe it's this shot. All these different kind of installations, and then they move. They flip in the wind, or maybe they had them some sort of like a mechanical system flipping them. But either way, the thing that interests me in terms of how this relates to thinking about really kind of open-ended process thinking is the way they're kind of like trying to push themselves outside the box and think in a more like a studio artist as to how they can bring kind of like this back and forth synthesis between their ideas, and how they can come up with almost like installation ideas that would get at their concepts. Another way of thinking about concept that I think is kind of, as well as process, that is in some ways similar to the way studio artists would be visual display. So I want to talk a little bit about visual display, and if you can't talk about visual display without talking about Edward Tufte, who wrote Visual Explanations along with a number of other pretty important works on the issue of visual display. He taught graphic design, I think, at Cornell. I do believe that's right. He's most famous for the fact that he hated PowerPoint. And frankly, even though I'm a person who uses PowerPoint a whole lot, I understand. I especially dislike the templates in PowerPoint. And oh man, I'm going to run out of time again. And so one of the things, I don't have a lot of time to talk about Tufte, and he's a kind of important, but I'm going to skip him because we're going to go on to, just keep in mind, information display is really important. I might cover it in another lecture. You can look up Edward Tufte. You can look up his research on the Challenger space shuttle disaster. And I know everyone's very loud. I'm sorry. But lastly, I just want to talk about concept and concept products. And in terms of designers, what that means, because sometimes when we use the word concept and when we talk about conceptual art, like I'm going to do in one of the lectures following here, there are a lot of different ways we think about concept. And when in the commercial world, when we're talking about like a concept product, what we're talking about is a thing that is a physical thing that we're trying to use to represent what something else would be. So a concept car or a concept product is not actually the product you would buy, but it is rather a representation of some future product that someone might buy. And then lastly, I want to talk very briefly, got 30 seconds to talk about concept art. And it's a big topic, but in the commercial world, especially in the world of filmmaking and animation, concept art is basically very much like a form of illustration, but for a very specific purpose, or a series of specific purposes. One of the purposes is for it to communicate to the public about projects that are coming up. Sometimes concept art can be made to be then brought forth at, like, let's say, a convention to get get people who are interested in a particular project or a particular movie. But it can also be used to sell an idea to potential producers, potential backers. And then later on, it could be used in terms of for actually the development of the actual work, such as a good example would be here, where this concept art was used to develop the exact look of what that scene was going to be, the lighting and the arrangement. So anyway, that's where I'm going to end. Sorry I had to cut off Edward Tufte.